November 2025, Russia's skies flared with missile trails, once again signaling what some analysts later called the night Moscow lost its immunity. After months of warnings, the Kremlin struck deep into Ukraine's energy grid, triggering the largest retaliatory drone operation of the war. Could this finally mark the moment when the balance of power shifts from battlefield to infrastructure war? What happens when energy itself becomes the front line? Ukraine's leadership had issued repeated warnings through autumn 2025. President Zelensky had declared publicly that if Russia turns off our lights, we will turn off theirs. When Russian bombers unleashed 650 Shahed drones and 52 missiles, 6 of them ballistic, against cities from Kharkiv to Kyiv, that promise was activated. Despite most drones being intercepted, a handful struck power plants, plunging districts into darkness and killing 3 civilians, including a 7-year-old girl. The symbolism was devastating. A nation, once proud of its resilience, was again facing winter under attack. Yet what Moscow hadn't calculated was the domino effect its own escalation would unleash. By targeting Ukraine's energy lifelines, Russia disrupted not only electricity, but also its own logistical future. Within 48 hours, Ukrainian defense planners initiated Operation Mirror Storm, a coordinated swarm of long-range drones aimed directly at Russia's heartland. According to Reuters and Defense News, this retaliation involved roughly 800 drones, nearly quadruple Ukraine's previous record, launched from dispersed sites using satellite-guided navigation. Analysts at BBC Defense corresponded that never before had Russia faced so many simultaneous aerial incursions over such a vast area. The attack exposed the vulnerabilities of Russia's centralized power grid. Experts at DW described it as a house of cards built on outdated Soviet infrastructure. When one node fell, the Chagino substation near Moscow, it triggered cascading shutdowns across the network. This was the domino principle in action. One strike rippled through an entire nation's circuitry, revealing that Moscow's illusion of invincibility was grounded in brittle wiring. Meanwhile, Ukraine's use of cheaper modular drones illustrated a second layer of warfare, the opportunity cost that Moscow now faced. To repair a single damaged power hub, Russian engineers estimated expenses exceeding $50 million. Each replacement transformer required diversion of components from industrial regions like Chelyabinsk and Omsk factories, previously reserved for military hardware. As Al Jazeera observed, every ruble Russia spends on repair crews is one less for ammunition or drones of its own. In effect, Putin's offensive had forced him into a war of maintenance. From Washington, President Trump's administration urged restraint, but quietly expanded intelligence sharing with NATO's eastern flank partners. A senior Pentagon official told the New York Times that the shift in Ukraine's targeting shows strategic maturity, its deterrence through energy parity. Western analysts contrasted Ukraine's pinpoint retaliation with Russia's indiscriminate bombardments, highlighting a strategic contrast. While Russia sought terror, Ukraine aimed for symmetry. By dawn on November 4th, Moscow's skyline flickered under partial blackout. Trains stalled, data centers went offline, and even sections of the Kremlin's administrative grid were forced to rely on emergency generators. In BBC's morning broadcast, an anchor asked the question reverberating through Europe: has the war finally come home to Russia? The answer, it seemed, was only beginning to unfold. Because as Moscow reeled from its first citywide power loss in decades, Ukrainian operators were already tracking new coordinates for the next wave. And what came next would push Russian defenses to the edge of collapse. By the early hours of November 2, 2025, Moscow's night sky had turned into a chaotic constellation of anti-aircraft fire. Residents filmed what looked like a scene from a science fiction movie, hundreds of flashes arcing upward, as sirens blared across the capital. What no one yet realized was that Ukraine had just executed one of the most complex saturation drone operations in modern warfare. How could a country under siege for nearly 3 years manage to strike the very nerve center of its aggressor? The answer began with Ukraine's doctrine of distributed swarms. According to Defense News, Kyiv's engineers, supported by Western electronic warfare intelligence, had spent months developing decentralized drone navigation systems capable of operating even when GPS jamming was present. On that November night, around 800 drones lifted off from multiple fronts, some from the Kharkiv region, others reportedly from mobile platforms near the Black Sea. Unlike conventional attacks, this one was algorithmically timed, so that waves of drones would converge over Moscow, simultaneously overwhelming radar bandwidth and air defense coordination. Russian Telegram channels first reported about 250 incoming drones. Within minutes, that number doubled. By 2 a.m., Reuters confirmed nearly 700 to 800 airborne targets detected on Russian radar. Air defense units deployed everything from Panzer S-1 cannons to S-400 missiles, yet the math was against them. A single missile costing $2 million was being fired at a drone worth $20,000 or less. As one retired NATO commander told BBC News, this is a classic opportunity cost trap. Russia is spending gold to destroy plastic. That imbalance formed the core of Ukraine's evolving strategy. Every interception Russia achieved drained its finances, while every missed drone risked infrastructural paralysis. The result was a double squeeze, economic and psychological. Russian analysts on Izvestia TV admitted that logistics, not bravery, will determine endurance. Within hours, the lights began to dim across Moscow's southeastern suburbs. Footage verified by The Guardian showed fires near the Elektrostal power plant and a massive blackout stretching toward Balashikha. Civil defense channels were flooded with contradictory orders. Even emergency responders lacked clear maps of which substations were offline. By morning, the Kremlin's Ministry of Energy announced localized disruptions, though Western satellite data suggested that 15% of the capital's grid was down. This marked the domino effect that Kyiv had anticipated. Each disabled power junction forced load transfers to adjacent circuits, which then overheated, producing rolling blackouts. Military analysts called it energy attrition by algorithm. Ukraine had effectively taught its drones to exploit the geometry of Russia's own grid, turning Moscow's size into a liability. From Washington and Warsaw, NATO monitoring centers tracked the strike in real time. DW reported that Western analysts saw the event as proof that asymmetric warfare can neutralize conventional superiority. Even though President Trump refrained from direct commentary, his administration authorized additional intelligence sharing through the Poland Coordination Cell, ensuring Ukrainian planners could map Russian responses in real time. As dawn broke, confusion spread across the Russian capital. Commuter trains halted mid-journey, digital payment systems failed, and cellular towers went silent in several districts. What was meant to be a demonstration of Russian air defense prowess had turned into an unfiltered display of vulnerability. Yet the most unsettling revelation was not the damage itself, but how swiftly Ukraine's swarm had adapted. Each failed interception taught the drones to reroute and penetrate elsewhere. As Al Jazeera's military correspondent summarized, Russia's shield was chasing ghosts while the real storm hit its core. Meanwhile, Western defense institutes began analyzing whether such algorithmic swarm tactics could redefine future warfare across Europe. Could NATO one day employ similar models for deterrence? Or would adversaries learn faster than the alliance can adapt? The blackout in Moscow raised questions far beyond Russia's borders. And what unfolded next would test whether the Kremlin's command structure could withstand its own manufactured chaos. By November 3, 2025 Moscow awoke to a city that felt eerily paralyzed. Entire districts had gone dark overnight, elevators were frozen mid-shaft, and commuters trudged through half-lit metro stations guided only by phone flashlights. The Kremlin's official line called it temporary disruptions, but Reuters confirmed what most Russians already knew: the capital of the world's largest energy exporter had lost power. How could a nation sitting atop some of Earth's richest fuel reserves fail to keep its own lights on? The blackout was more than symbolic. It was systemic. According to DW Energy Desk, multiple substations around Moscow, including at least 2 near Podolsk and Elektrostal, suffered catastrophic overloads. The Chagino Junction, one of the capital's primary distribution hubs, was hit hardest. Analysts described the event as the first energy mirror strike of the conflict, Ukraine giving Russia a taste of the same darkness it had endured since 2022. The domino effect analysis was undeniable. When the Chagino plant failed, its load shifted to nearby grids, causing a cascade that tripped automated breakers across 5 regions. Industrial operations were forced offline. Even parts of Moscow's southern railway halted due to power shortages. The New York Times cited energy consultants who estimated that each hour of outage cost the Moscow region roughly $25 million in lost productivity. This wasn't merely a military humiliation, it was an economic chokehold. At the same time, Russia's opportunity cost soared. The government had to mobilize emergency repair brigades from Kaluga and Smolensk, diverting critical technical teams that were originally assigned to refurbish tank assembly plants. An internal briefing leaked to BBC News revealed that the Defense Ministry had requested at least $1 billion in emergency funding to secure backup generators for strategic facilities. Every ruble spent on rewiring is one less spent on the front line, noted military economist Pavel Luzin. For civilians, the crisis felt apocalyptic. Videos on Telegram captured Muscovites crowding supermarkets for candles and portable heaters. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and fears of a prolonged blackout sparked localized protests in Balashikha and Lyubertsy. Social scientists from the Higher School of Economics warned that the psychological impact of sudden vulnerability may alter public opinion faster than sanctions ever did. Western experts highlighted a strategic contrast. Russia had sought to break Ukraine's morale by freezing its cities, yet now it was the Kremlin struggling to maintain its own stability. This is poetic deterrence, said retired U.S. Air Force analyst Colonel Robert Peters to Al Jazeera. By striking energy nodes, Ukraine didn't just retaliate, it rewrote the logic of escalation. Meanwhile, inside the Kremlin, senior officials debated how to frame the crisis without revealing the extent of damage. State television avoided mentioning power failures altogether, focusing instead on footage of successful air defense operations. But Russian citizens were filming the truth. The skyline dimmed, the streets quiet, and even the luxury districts of Rubliovka were running on diesel generators. Internationally, the blackout rattled markets. European energy prices briefly spiked by 8% amid speculation that Russia might curtail gas exports to divert resources domestically. The Guardian's economic desk warned that the war's energy front is merging with its financial one. As evening approached, some electricity returned, but the rhythm of daily life had broken. Businesses stayed shut, and residents feared another wave. A NATO energy analyst in Brussels summarized the situation succinctly. Moscow just discovered that power is no longer its weapon, it's its weakness. Yet the most intriguing question remained: would Putin retaliate militarily to restore deterrence? Or had Ukraine's drones opened a new chapter of energy warfare that Russia couldn't match? What followed next would expose the cracks not only in Russia's grid, but in its propaganda machine. By November 4th, 2025, the Kremlin's propaganda machine shifted into overdrive. Television anchors, visibly tense, assured viewers that the so-called blackout was nothing more than a Western fabrication. Yet across Moscow, the silence of powerless apartment blocks told another story. In a nation where control of the narrative has long equaled control of the population, the flicker of truth began breaking through the darkness. Could Russia's own information grid survive what its electrical grid could not? State TV programs attempted to reframe the blackout as a NATO-engineered cyber provocation. Talk show hosts accused Western intelligence of manipulating atmospheric data to distort radar and enable the drone attack. But as BBC Monitoring reported, viewers were increasingly skeptical. "When my fridge is off and my phone's dead," one Muscovite told The Guardian, "I don't need NATO to tell me the power's gone." The blackout had ignited what analysts called an information aftershock. Russian citizens began sharing uncensored updates through VPNs and encrypted channels. Satellite imagery from Reuters and Maxar Technologies contradicted official claims, clearly showing blackout zones extending beyond Moscow's ring road. As independent journalist Ilya Shepelin noted, the darkness made lies visible. Economically, the domino effect expanded. With factories in Elektrostal, Kolomna, and Tula forced to suspend output supply chains for precision components, especially turbine blades and armored vehicle parts, were severed. The Ministry of Industry admitted to a temporary logistical mismatch, a euphemism that Defense News interpreted as major disruption. Each hour of downtime compounded Russia's opportunity cost. Military contracts delayed, exports stalled, and repair funds ballooning. Western intelligence assessments suggested that the blackout's ripple reached deeper than energy. When you destabilize power flow, you destabilize communication and morale, said retired UK defense attaché Sir Andrew Hall to Al Jazeera. Russia's strength has always been projection. Now it's introspection. The same networks once used to launch cyber operations against Ukraine were now being rerouted for internal emergency management. For NATO strategists, the moment carried symbolic weight. Ukraine achieved something remarkable: precision without provocation, argued a DW editorial. By attacking infrastructure rather than civilians, Kyiv had blurred the line between retaliation and deterrence, forcing Russia into an exhausting defense of its own depth. This represented a strategic contrast. Moscow had sought domination through fear, but Ukraine had weaponized restraint. Inside Russia, however, restraint was fading fast. Kremlin advisors reportedly urged Putin to retaliate with demonstrative precision strikes on Ukraine's Western energy grid. But such moves risked inviting stronger Western responses. A Pentagon source told the New York Times that Washington is monitoring for any escalation beyond infrastructure, ready to recalibrate NATO's deterrence posture if needed. President Trump's administration, though emphasizing diplomacy, had quietly authorized enhanced satellite reconnaissance over Belarus and Western Russia, signaling preparedness without direct intervention. Public frustration in Moscow was reaching dangerous levels. Small gatherings formed outside municipal offices, demanding explanations, quickly dispersed by riot police. The blackout is now political, observed Reuters' Moscow bureau. Every candlelit window is a statement of doubt. Amid the growing tension, Russian talk shows began blaming internal saboteurs, hinting at purges within the energy ministry. Such scapegoating risked fracturing elite unity, a far greater threat than drones. As one anonymous Kremlin aide told BBC Russia, "We can fix power lines. We cannot fix fear." As the fourth night fell, power flickered back through half the city, but the propaganda machine was no longer synchronized with the public mood. Analysts in Brussels noted that the Kremlin's control grid has suffered its first power surge. Yet the question now burned brighter than the lights returning to Moscow. If Ukraine could paralyze Russia without crossing the nuclear threshold, what new boundaries of warfare would be tested next? By November 5, 2020, 25, the focus of the crisis had shifted westward to Brussels, Warsaw, and Washington. Within NATO headquarters, the Moscow blackout dominated security briefings. What Ukraine had accomplished was not just a symbolic strike, but a live demonstration of how asymmetric energy warfare could destabilize a nuclear superpower. The alliance now faced a strategic puzzle: how to support Ukraine's innovation without escalating into open confrontation. Could this be the moment NATO's deterrence doctrine itself evolves? According to Reuters, early intelligence indicated that Ukraine's drones incorporated guidance data from Western commercial satellite systems, legally accessible but strategically potent. Analysts at Defense News pointed out that this fusion of civilian tech and military improvisation has made Ukraine a pioneer in algorithmic warfare. NATO's Cooperative Cyber Defense Center in Tallinn reportedly began studying the operation as a case study in scalable deterrence, how small nations could neutralize larger adversaries through network disruption rather than conventional firepower. President Trump's administration publicly urged restraint on all sides, but privately expanded real-time data sharing via the Poland-based Artemis intelligence cell. A senior Pentagon official told the New York Times that our role is informational, not operational, but information can change outcomes. This phrasing, analysts noted, hinted at quiet endorsement. BBC security correspondent Frank Gardner described it as deterrence by distance, helping Ukraine without officially being there. The opportunity cost for Russia was becoming unbearable. Every damaged substation demanded parts that its sanctions-hit economy could no longer easily import. DW Business reported that the cost of transformer production had risen by 270% due to restricted access to Western components. Reallocation of resources forced Moscow to suspend several civilian infrastructure projects, including 2 regional hospitals and a highway expansion near Nizhny Novgorod. As energy economist Natalia Orlova explained to Al Jazeera, every blackout bill Russia pays now is borrowed from its future. At NATO's Brussels summit that week, delegates debated whether to formally categorize infrastructure warfare as a hybrid threat equal to cyber and missile domains. Poland, the Baltic states, and Romania argued that Ukraine's actions had exposed vulnerabilities across Europe's own grid systems. The dominoes don't stop at Moscow, said Lithuanian Defense Minister Arvydas Anušauskas. If energy becomes the next front, then every transmission tower is a battlefield. This led to a crucial strategic contrast in Western thinking. For decades, NATO deterrence revolved around troop deployments and nuclear umbrellas. Now, analysts were urging an update: protection of infrastructure and data flows as pillars of modern defense. We are witnessing a shift from tanks to transformers, wrote The Guardian's defense columnist. Ukraine has redefined victory as sustainability under fire. Meanwhile, Russian military bloggers blamed NATO ghosts for Ukraine's success, claiming that AI algorithms used in the drone strike bore Western signatures. Such rhetoric, while conspiratorial, alarmed Western policymakers who feared it could justify retaliatory cyber strikes. European power grids quietly went on alert, running drills to simulate drone-induced overloads. Inside the Kremlin, generals pushed for a decisive countermeasure, a strategic reset, as Reuters' Moscow desk phrased it. Putin reportedly demanded plans for retaliatory strikes on Ukrainian logistics hubs, but advisors cautioned that escalation risked deeper NATO involvement. One Western intelligence source summarized the dilemma: Russia is trapped between humiliation and overreaction. For NATO, the blackout was both a warning and a window. It revealed how a non-member partner could pioneer tactics that outpaced alliance doctrines. If Ukraine can do this today, asked a U.S. Army War College report, what happens when NATO adopts the same efficiency tomorrow? As the alliance recalibrated its deterrence model, one fact remained clear: the war's front line was no longer defined by trenches or tanks, but by the invisible circuitry binding economies and nations together. And in that circuitry, the next phase of the conflict was already sparking. By November 6, 2025, the shockwaves from the blackout were still rippling through Russia's political and economic landscape. Factories in the Moscow region were operating at half capacity. Supermarkets were limiting refrigeration hours, and financial systems remained unstable. The Kremlin called it technical recovery mode, but the reality, according to Reuters, was a capital struggling to reboot itself under siege from within. Could this be the turning point where Moscow's war ambitions collapse under the weight of their own infrastructure? The Kremlin's internal assessments, leaked to BBC Russia, revealed growing panic. At least 40% of the city's energy distribution network had suffered critical stress, and complete restoration could take weeks. Officials feared that another Ukrainian strike could plunge the capital into total darkness again, something unimaginable for the Russian leadership a year earlier. Military analysts labeled this phase the energy attrition war. Ukraine's strategy had moved beyond symbolic retaliation. It was now economic throttling through precision disruption. Defense News reported that Ukraine was using a rotation of AI-assisted targeting, integrating data from Western satellites to identify weak points in Russia's grid. It's not destruction for destruction's sake, said analyst Michael Kaufman. It's a methodical campaign to exhaust repair capacity faster than it can be replaced. The domino effect was already visible. Each energy failure delayed production at arms factories, reduced fuel supply to regional bases, and forced civilian discontent higher. One Kyiv strategist told The Guardian that every blackout in Russia means fewer missiles over Ukraine next month. This logic epitomized deterrence through resource depletion. Meanwhile, the opportunity cost for the Kremlin deepened. A confidential report from DW Business estimated that Moscow had diverted nearly $3 billion from defense procurement into emergency energy reconstruction. The Ministry of Finance froze dozens of local development projects to compensate. They are cannibalizing tomorrow to survive today, remarked Al Jazeera's economic correspondent. The fiscal trade-off echoed across Russia's regional governments, many already facing budget shortfalls and worker unrest. Internationally, Western capitals monitored Moscow's next move. Inside NATO, a joint task force under the US-Poland Coordination Unit reviewed contingency plans in case Russia sought retaliation through cyber attacks or electronic warfare. President Trump's administration publicly emphasized containment and caution, while privately signaling to European allies that Washington would not tolerate attacks beyond Ukraine. In DW's analysis, the U.S. posture has shifted from reactive to supervisory. Trump wants deterrence without direct entanglement. In Moscow, however, paranoia replaced strategy. State media alternated between blaming NATO Ukraine and cosmic anomalies. The Russian Orthodox Church even framed the blackout as divine punishment. This narrative confusion mirrored the crumbling unity of Russia's elite. When the lights go out and the Kremlin factions start whispering, commented a Reuters Moscow insider. The once carefully managed illusion of strength was now replaced by visible desperation. On Ukraine's side, the confidence was palpable, but tempered by realism. Energy Minister Herman Halushchenko noted that the goal is not revenge, but prevention. The message was clear: if Russia stops targeting civilian grids, Ukraine stops targeting Moscow's. Yet few in Kyiv believed Putin would heed the warning. Experts across NATO saw in this escalation a strategic contrast. Russia's attempt to subdue Ukraine through mass destruction had resulted in self-inflicted economic strangulation, while Ukraine's asymmetric precision had gained both military and moral ground. It's deterrence by humiliation, said former U.S. defense official Evelyn Farkas to BBC World Service. Every successful Ukrainian strike exposes how outdated Russia's command model truly is. By the night of November 6th, lights flickered back on in some Moscow neighborhoods. But so did a new fear. What if the next wave came when the temperature dropped below zero? That uncertainty hung heavy over both capitals. Meanwhile, Western analysts warned that this was not an end, but a new phase of the war, a prolonged struggle over infrastructure resilience and technology. And as winter crept closer, one question remained unanswered: would Moscow rebuild its power? Or would Ukraine's next swarm ensure that the darkness becomes permanent?